On August 2nd, something terrible began in Crimea. This is fucked up. Ukrainian Neptunes attacked 3 nuclear airfields in Crimea. Everything is on fire. No way, no way, boom! Are you seriously filming this absolutely incredible, truly amazing, and utterly unforgettable moment right now for real? Unbelievable. There were explosions in Sevastopol, Simferopol and Yevpatoria, Bakhchisarai district, Alushka, Feodosia, Saki, and Novofedorivka. No way. The airfields in Saki, Gvardiiska, and Kirovsky are on fire. That's an explosion. Powerful special operations have begun in Crimea to eliminate Russian military forces. The nuclear triad is under attack. The Black Sea Fleet, airfields, and oil refineries. Take off! Damn, they hit the train station. Take off, damn it, for fuck's sake. Give the order, for fuck's sake!
Crimea was burning last night. 4 key military airfields were attacked. This is where the strategic nuclear combat base launches from.
This is fucked up.
Saki, Gvardeyskoye, Kirovskoye. A strike on aviation. About 200 drones attacked Crimea last night. The drones targeted the Saki, Gvardeyskoye, and Kirovskoye airfields. NASA satellites are recording a massive fire near the Gvardeyskoye airfield in Crimea. At the Crystal oil depot in Engels, another fuel tank has caught fire. The whole city is covered in smoke. As they say, the show must go on, or in other words, the action at the Crystal oil depot in Engels has been going on for several days now. Meanwhile, Russia has lost another Su-25. Special operation forces have destroyed a decision-making center in the Kherson direction. And the headquarters of the Russian forces in Makivka was also attacked and blown up. We'll discuss all this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svitan. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. Hello. I wish everyone good health.
Roman Grigorievich, let's start with the hell in occupied Crimea, because more than 200 drones attacked 3 key military airfields, Gvardiiske, Saki, and Kirovske. Novofedorivka was also attacked. The floor is yours.
Novofedorivka is a depot near Saki. So basically, Novofedorivka and the Saki airfield are part of the same complex. The strike on Crimea today was truly large-scale. This is what we have repeatedly requested, let's put it mildly, on air, because we kept circling around Crimea but never touched it. It was, so to speak, a kind of sacred cow. Honestly, today was a well-executed, solid attack. Really, 200 drones can overwhelm any air defense system, any at all. Thanks to the large number of decoys, the Russian forces, at least the air defense units, expended their missiles today. And yet quite significant damage was still inflicted on Russian airfields in Saki, near Simferopol, and of course, near Sevastopol. And drones even managed to reach Kerch. There are 2 significant airfields located there that are currently being actively prepared, I would say, as primary launch sites for new incoming batches of Geran 2 and Geran 3 drones. And these 2 airfields were also attacked, at least as of now. The operation was well thought out, excellently executed, and most likely it was carried out by our army. This isn't a special operation, it's more likely regular army work. You could even say it was already under the command of Madyar, the new commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces, who has just taken office. Although, in reality, it should be our navy working in Crimea, that is the navy, the naval forces. Within the naval forces, there should be their own Madyar, their own sailor Madyar, who will create unmanned systems forces specifically focused on maritime operations, underwater, surface, and aerial for the liberation of Crimea. If today's attack is not a one-off but systematic, then believe me, by the end of the year, at least half of the Russians in Crimea will simply disappear, just vanish. Because if this happens every day, even with just 100, even 100 drones, targeting airfields first, definitely. Why airfields? The Russians use airfields in several ways. First, as bases for tactical or army aviation. That means airplanes and helicopters. Second, they use the airfield to deploy anti-aircraft missile systems and radar units of the Russian Federation's radio-technical troops. And third, they use almost all airfields as transit depots for transferring ammunition. That's why for us, it's especially important first and foremost to destroy the airfields and everything on them. airfield technical equipment, vehicles, ammunition, and of course, aircraft.
Roman Grigorievich, I wanted to talk to you about aviation. In the meantime, dear audience, please like this video. In the comments, let us know what you think of the successful operations of the Ukrainian armed forces and the idea that Crimea should burn military targets and that Russians should be swimming backstroke and freestyle to Russian territory. Roman Grigorievich, can we assume that at these airfields that were attacked last night, enemy aircraft were also targeted, or did we only strike the fuel facilities there? What do you think?
Well, Russian aircraft are not stationed at all of those airfields right now. They have mostly pulled back to central and eastern airfields in Crimea. Therefore, some of the airfields are used by the Russians either for army aviation, for helicopters, for operational purposes, so to speak, or for the deployment of anti-aircraft missile systems and radio technical troops. So for us, it's very important in order to deliver serious strikes against Russian aviation, but for that, we first need to achieve air superiority. It starts with the destruction of ground-based surveillance and response systems, meaning those same anti-aircraft missile systems. That's exactly what started today. The thing is, such operations have already started several times, but then they were cut short, as if by the wave of a magic wand. How many times have we already said, well, here's the beginning, and then suddenly it shuts off again for a month and a half, 2 months, and no one even looks sideways at Crimea, at least. Well, now I'm just truly afraid to be wrong again, you know. If this is the beginning of Crimea's liberation, then attacks like this should happen every night. Every night, 100 drones should be flying into Crimea.
Roman Grigorievich regarding the SBU special operation, Novorossiysk, and also the missile carriers. We see how during massive missile attacks, missile carriers go out into the Black Sea. As I understand it, they hide them in Novorossiysk and bring them out to sea on the necessary days. Question: how can we attack all the missile carriers today so that the Black Sea fleet ceases to exist?
Well, they have up to 100 ships and submarines left. Both submarines, there are 4 of them, and surface ships are missile carriers, at least carriers of caliber missiles. The submarines mainly have 4 caliber missiles each in their torpedo tubes, while the ships can have 4, 6, or even 8. Well, it depends on what kind of launcher is installed. Just a few months ago, our prominent banking company, in collaboration with our Saudi partners, made a significant commitment not to target or strike Russian oil refineries, the broader Russian oil industry, and also the formidable Black Sea fleet. That's why they now feel right at home, as they say, at least in the eastern waters of the Black Sea. So here the question is, first of all, for the politicians. Well, actually, not even for the politicians. Now the question is for the security services. Why haven't they yet arrested for treason those politicians who ensured the safety of Russian hydrocarbons and the Russian Black Sea fleet? The Russians are leaving the base, say Novorossiysk, and going out to sea only to avoid being hit. That is, when they enter the base, it's a compact area with a high concentration of Russian ships. They leave to avoid being targeted and then naturally return, mainly for maintenance purposes.
If we analyze whether Ukrainian special services could carry out something similar, but only on Russian territory, do our capabilities match? Let's discuss this.
Well, from a military standpoint, the preparation and execution of the operation were at the highest level. Special services were involved, including Mossad and several other Israeli agencies, plus the Air Force. Again, pay attention, the main thing here is the Air Force. That is long-range strike capabilities. About 200 fighter jets or various types of aircraft took off and struck previously identified targets. Moreover, the air defense systems had been practically neutralized beforehand by a Mossad special operation. So it was a combined attack, well thought out, well prepared, and well executed. But that's from a military perspective. It's like if we were now discussing whether the executioner's axe that beheaded some king was well sharpened. Well, it was well sharpened, no doubt about that. The question is, why was there a need to behead at all? That's a different question. That's another aspect. The fact is, Israeli strikes on Iran at this point would ignite a war in the Middle East, and that would affect us as well. At the very least, it would hit us first by driving up oil prices. Right now, the price of oil has already risen by more than 10%, and it could go up by as much as 30%. That means oil could rebound to $100, $100 per barrel. Russia would then receive twice as many petrodollars as before, twice as much. So there was a trend toward falling oil prices, a trend toward a declining Russian economy, but now it's all the opposite, a complete turnaround of 180 degrees. There will be a rise in oil prices, a rise in revenues for the Russian hydrocarbon sector, and naturally an increase in the production of military equipment, the procurement of ammunition, and the enlistment of new recruits. In other words, the ongoing war in the Middle East will undoubtedly hit us very hard through the significant surge in Russia's influence and power. And at the very critical moment when it was absolutely necessary to decisively destroy the Russian hydrocarbon sector, our powerful banking cabal inexplicably shielded these vital Russian oil and gas facilities from potential strikes by our dedicated special services and our brave army. How can we counteract this? Reactivate the Malak sanctions mechanism and strikes. The most effective and impactful sanctions against the Russian oil and gas sector are its complete and utter destruction, especially since it is asking to be destroyed. But in the end, even Russian partisans are actively doing this. We clearly see how they deliberately set fire to vast forests where crucial Russian oil pipelines run, how they meticulously set fires, as we previously mentioned, even in the distant Far Eastern Ukrainian People's Republic. Well, first and foremost, it's crucial to understand that there is absolutely nothing available, no tools, no resources, no materials, and no means whatsoever to accomplish the task at hand. This complete absence of any necessary components or instruments makes it entirely impossible to proceed with or even begin the intended action, leaving us in a state of complete stagnation and inability to move forward with any progress. Believe me, if we had the means, some of our organizations would have done it long ago. We don't have missiles, we don't have ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, even though we should have them in a missile country like Ukraine. And not having missiles, well, that's just laughable and tragic at the same time. This is a question for the authorities, for all the authorities over the more than 30 years of our independence. We were left without missiles during the Russian offensive operations. So it's clear that only we can do this. It's up to us to do it. Us. No one is going to do anything for us, and there's no point in asking anyone else. We have to do this ourselves and strike at the Russian leadership, including those who are where? In the Kremlin. The Rubliovka bathhouses and the Kremlin. How long have we been talking about this? 3 years. What should it be? What should it be done with? Strikes on certain Iranian military targets. Well, first of all, nuclear facilities. Well, it's not that easy to reach a nuclear facility. For example, the facility that was attacked by the Israelis is buried more than 50 meters underground. You can't just reach it like that. That's one. And second, above this facility, above the centrifuges, above the reactor and the centrifuges, there is an 8-meter thick layer of concrete. So they really prepared thoroughly there. So if we're being realistic, Iran's nuclear facilities weren't actually damaged. In Bushehr, the plant runs on Russian fuel, and in that sense, it wasn't touched at all. There are about 5 or 6 Iranian facilities, and for the most part, they only tried to hit one of them. But even then, they only managed to strike from above. Inside, everything kept working as before. The centrifuges keep spinning, so what will Iran's response be? Well, who knows? Especially now, the so-called Pandora's box has been opened. In other words, there was a strike on a nuclear facility. That means Iran could now retaliate with similar nuclear waste after all. They could take the waste from Bushehr now and with strontium and cesium cover Israel. Then, as far as I know, with cesium, you wouldn't be able to live there for 24,000 years. And if they hit with uranium-235 or uranium-238, one has a half-life of 700 million years and the other 4.5 billion years. So can you imagine what would happen to Israel in that case? And again, who will end up suffering? The Zionists will scheme, they'll flee to the United States, and it will be the ordinary Israelis left behind who will have to deal with the radiation. These are things that simply cannot be allowed. Strikes on nuclear facilities are absolutely unacceptable by definition. There are certain international control mechanisms like the IAEA, and it has been granted access there on some points. Recently, preparations were already underway to extend the 2015 agreement, again under IAEA supervision together with the Europeans. That's why the Israelis carried out a preemptive strike, solely to preempt the agreement with Europe and the IAEA. In other words, they didn't give Iran the opportunity to sign this agreement. If the agreement had been in place, as it was from 2015 to 2018, the IAEA would have had full control over all stages of uranium enrichment. And so now the Israelis have created, or rather to be more precise, the Israelis have created a problem for ordinary Israelis. And what the response will be, well, it's hard to say offhand, but Iranians are not simple people either, believe me. There are an order of magnitude more of them, at least in terms of numbers. And no one is going to forgive things like this. So ahead lies a serious bloody war, which for us, it's a negative. It hasn't brought us any positives at all, and it won't. Why? Because the Shaheds that everyone talks about, the Iranian ones and so on and so forth, are actually the Chinese Sunflower 200. The Russian Geran is not an Iranian Shahed. The Russian Geran is the Chinese Sunflower 200. No matter how many military facilities you destroy in Iran, the Russians have been assembling the Chinese Sunflower 200 from Chinese parts and calling it Geran, and they'll keep doing so. If you're going to target the main production plants, then you should be targeting the Chinese ones. What are the Israelis going to fly to China to destroy Chinese factories? That's something our intelligence services should be doing. These are questions for our intelligence services.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Dear audience, please like this video. Let us know what you think in the comments. We're returning to our main top topic, Russian aggression, the war Russia is waging against Ukraine. Roman Grigorievich, regarding the oil depot, for example, another fuel tank caught fire at the Crystal oil depot in Engels. The whole city is covered in smoke. Essentially, drones attacked the oil depot on the night of June 5th to 6th, but the fire still hasn't been put out. Let's evaluate this situation.
Well, first of all, this isn't just an oil depot, or rather, it's not an ordinary oil depot. If we're talking about oil depots in Russia, there are thousands of them. In reality, it's a fuel and lubricant storage facility for the Engels 2 backup aviation airfield. And it's precisely in this capacity that it is very important to us. This is a supply depot, the main base and main storage for aviation kerosene. It's underground, located in karst caves, in caisson reservoirs. In other words, just try to get there. There are tens of thousands of tons of kerosene stored there. So from this underground reservoir, the fuel is pumped into the supply base, into the crystal, and then, well, the base or the fuel and lubricants depot, what we call the fuel and lubricants depot. From there, it goes to refuel the aircraft. And the point that was chosen was correct, where at least the main flow could be cut off. Of course, they also have a backup option where they can refuel directly from the caissons. But I think we'll get to those as well. So the strike on this fuel and lubricants depot was excellently executed and precisely calculated. We discussed before how the attack was carried out. They broke through the Russian air defense frontally using a large number of decoy drones, and the strike drones got through, took out the target, and set 3 tanks on fire right away immediately. And until it burns out completely, this won't stop. Kerosene is an interesting product. You can actually use it to put out fire. If you take a bucket of kerosene and pour it on a fire, it actually puts the fire out. But it's the kerosene vapors that burn. And if you heat kerosene up to a certain temperature and then ignite the vapors, which is what happened during the strike by our drones, then it's almost impossible to put it out. And they don't even try to extinguish it. They just step aside, dig a trench around it, and watch until it all burns out. And as long as there's something left to burn, it will keep burning. It could keep burning for another month.
Roman Grigorievich, today's news. Russia has lost another Su-25.
Well, most likely, these are losses related to technical issues. The Su-25s are already 40 years old. They've been flying since the Afghan war, since the 1980s. They were good aircraft, even excellent for their time when they were built. A solid attack aircraft. But now they're old, really old grandpas, I'd say. And technologically, of course, they're falling apart. And there aren't that many airframes left when you can only make 1 out of 2 or 3. So this fleet of aircraft the Russians have is dwindling and even just crashing like that, as happened today with the loss of a Russian plane.
Roman Grigorievich, over the past 2 days, we've also attacked the Moscow region where there were military targets. Roman Grigorievich, what exactly was attacked near Moscow in the last few days? Because the drones didn't reach Moscow, but explosions were heard near Moscow. They say those were military targets.
Approximately 30% of Russia's advanced high-tech military production capabilities are significantly concentrated within the bustling metropolis of Moscow and its surrounding expansive Moscow region. Consequently, a substantial 1/3 of this crucial industrial output is located specifically in Moscow and the broader Moscow region. That's why it's very important for us to break through, to penetrate Russian air defenses. It's very difficult to do this because there are at least two blocking units in place. The first is the frontal air defense, which is very hard to break through. This is in the Bryansk, Belgorod, and Tula regions, where the air defense is practically packed, especially facing toward Moscow. And the second is the site-based air defense around Moscow itself. So sometimes we see in the reports that the Russians have shot down 50 or 70 of our drones in the Bryansk and Belgorod regions. These were headed for Moscow. Mostly they shoot down decoys which cost a few $100s, while the missile used to shoot them down costs tens of thousands of dollars. Nevertheless, some still get through, and there was a strike in the Moscow region on one of the factories that produces circuit boards for electronics. As I said, this is high-tech production, and as a result, at least for now, the technological cycle has been halted. But in reality, to actually reach Moscow, you need ballistic missiles. Without ballistic missiles, we can't break through Moscow's air defense for specific targets. Drones won't get through.
Roman Grigorievich, in the Moscow region, a microelectronics factory in Zubovo was attacked. There's a hole in the roof. The factory in Zubovo is a production complex that is part of the Rezonit Technopark in the Moscow region. It specializes in manufacturing printed circuit boards and electronic components for various industries, including the defense sector. So, about this?
That's exactly what I was talking about, yes. So it was Rezonit that was hit. The technological cycle has been halted. That's the most important thing. But it can only be destroyed with ballistic missiles. Well, a drone, even with 50 kilograms, won't completely disable any military facility.
Roman Grigorievich, from a military standpoint, how many years would it take for Ukraine to have ballistic missiles? Not just a few, of course, but mass-produced, let's say 1,000 missiles a year? If we take examples from other countries that produce ballistic missiles?
Well, the thing is, Ukraine is a missile-producing country. Back in the Soviet Union, we produced several types of missiles with a full production cycle, starting from air-to-air missiles, ship-launched missiles like the KH-35 and KH-35U, from which the Neptune missile was developed. By the way, that's an aircraft-launched anti-ship missile. That is a ship-launched missile from the air. We produced it entirely, the full cycle. There were several other missiles of this kind as well. And ballistics, we produced ballistic missiles and also cruise missiles, if you can call them that. The KH-35U, especially at that level. And as for ballistics, we produced intercontinental ballistic missiles, the Satan SS-18. Before our Yuzhmash started production, it has a range of 11,000 kilometers, which means it could reach Beijing and Pyongyang. So we preserved the entire technological chain, the technical documentation, the production system, very important mechanisms for certain tests, test stands, and of course the engineering staff. We were producing there 10 years ago. We launched the Grom, a whole complex that we created with $100 million invested by the Saudis, and then sold it to them. That was just a few years ago. So we have the entire production base for manufacturing ballistic missiles. We wouldn't be starting from scratch. In order to launch, say, serial production of those same Groms with a range of 500 kilometers, we would need somewhere around $150 to $200 million and about a year and a half to 2 years. So if this government had started 6 years ago, we could have launched serial production of the Grom 2 3 times over by now. If at this point we don't have this Grom, and we don't because otherwise it would have long since hit Moscow, then it means that for 6 years this government has just been dragging its feet. That's a big problem. The executive branch should have been sent to the armed forces of Ukraine a long time ago. I've said it so many times already. The executive branch needs to be deshmihalized. You don't need elections or re-elections for this. According to our constitution, according to the legal framework of our laws, it's possible to change, replace the executive branch. Shmyhal and his team just aren't up to the task. They're absolutely not up to it. Umarov, Shmyhal, and all the rest of this Shmyhal crowd are not in the right positions. They need to be replaced with professionals who understand how to quickly launch a program like the ballistic one, or how to restructure the country's economy for wartime. But that's an entire process. The work should be done by military personnel with basic military education who also understand economics. We have enough people like that.
Roman Grigorievich, to wrap up. So, Special Operations Forces destroyed a Russian decision-making center in the Kherson direction. The Russian headquarters in Makivka was also attacked. The video report of the HIMARS MLRS strike was for the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and everyone wrote that there were many killed and many wounded. The floor is yours.
Well, about Makivka, I'm from Makivka myself. I've been saying for a while now, why aren't we striking their rear positions? So most likely our rocket troops thought, let's hit Makivka so Svitan doesn't start cursing left and right, and they went ahead and struck Makivka. The main thing is it was not far from my house. In other words, they accomplished the combat mission, of course. Well done, the range allows for it, and we have the means to strike. HIMARS works well at that range. And of course, there's also Kherson, the so-called southern front. There's some serious Russian activity going on there right now. They're still at a crossroads deciding where to send the remaining reserves, either to reinforce the Zaporizhzhia direction, meaning operations there, or to the right bank of the Dnipro near Kherson. So they still haven't decided yet, because the reserves that could have helped them in both directions were burned by Putin before May 9th, as he set unrealistic, basically unachievable objectives. So right now, at this moment, we could say, let's thank Putin for his complete idiocy in strategic planning, because it's precisely his idiocy, this political trap, that is giving us a breather right now. We still have about 2 months before the next wave of reserves arrives. In these 2 months, we can give the Russians a hard time. Well, we'll see what exactly we'll give them a hard time for, and we'll talk about it in each of our reviews.
Roman Grigorievich, we're almost at the end. The Russian armed forces have entered Yablunivka in the Sumi region, according to Deep State. That's 26 kilometers from the regional center. The gray zone has also expanded in Yunakivka, a village at the epicenter of the fighting. Please comment on this, it's very important.
Yablunivka and Yunakivka. Well, yesterday they said they were 20 kilometers from Sumi, and now it's already 26 kilometers. So does that mean they're having a negative advance or something? They've retreated 6 kilometers in the opposite direction. That's about where they are, somewhere between 20 and 30 kilometers. They're stuck there and will keep being stuck in that area. It's a small bridgehead, even if you look at it from the perspective of just the Sumi region, not to mention all of Ukraine, a small bridgehead that the Russians managed to seize by following right behind our retreating troops. That was a mistake made by our own politician. Here we were thanking Putin for his political decision. Here, it was the mistake of our politicians who held our troops in offensive positions on the Kursk direction almost to the point of disaster, practically to catastrophe. Then we had to run because, you see, the politicians wanted to have negotiations with the Saudis from a better position at the very least. Nothing happened for them, but we had to retreat from the Kursk region. And as our troops were retreating, the Russians rushed into the Sumi region. But I'll say it again, their position is about the same as it is in the Kharkiv region, around the area of Lipsy, where they are now, near Vovchansk. They rushed in and that's it, they got stuck. In the same way, the Russians will be stuck just around Yablunivka, Yanakivka, and so on, but not beyond that. They won't advance any further. That is, on the one hand, there are serious fortifications there, and secondly, that's the first thing. And secondly, reserves have now been redirected there, and our troops have already recovered from this strategic failure of our politicians. They've already recovered, and now in some areas, we're even regaining our previously lost positions, pushing the Russians back and advancing toward the Kursk direction, toward Tetkino, which is nearby to the west. The Russians entered our territory and we entered theirs. Nonsense.
Friends, please like this video. Roman Grigorievich and I meet 3 times a week on my YouTube channel, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, to discuss the military and political situation. In the comments, write a few kind words in support of Ukraine and share your thoughts on Israel's special operation. Also, let us know where you're watching from. Share your location in the comments. The well-known military analyst Roman Grigorievich, thank you. And as usual, see you again on Monday.